Hello everyone, it's Delta Shiny Zeta here bringing you another archetype review video. This time around we're going to be looking at the Skull Servant archetype, also known as the Wight Archetype. In many ways, the Wight Archetype name has actually become a lot more official than Skull Servant, but I'm saying Skull Servant for the sake of this video because a lot of people might actually not know what in the world Wight actually means, when people are generally a little more familiar with the whole Skull Servant terminology. You can use them interchangeably for the name of this archetype. So to this date, Skull Servants are one of the more interesting archetypes ever to be released in Yu-Gi-Oh! Simply because despite them not being meta or even rogue by any means, they're actually very interesting in terms of the potential the archetype has, despite it missing a number of key play components that they need in order to be an actual formidable archetype. The entire goal of the archetype is to dump Skull Servants or Wight monsters who become Skull Servant in the graveyard, to eventually get your King of the Skull Servants to OTK your opponent by utilizing only one attack, and bam, that's it. One thing that I will mention with this archetype, similarly to the Penguin archetype, is that you cannot rely on just archetype cards of this specific archetype alone. The reason why is because there's only 9 Skull Servant / Wight cards to be released. That's simply not enough support on its own to actually get you a formidable deck. Instead, you need cards that actually help you out by utilizing graveyard effects and dumping monsters in the graveyard so Skull Servant can reach its full potential. Alright, so like always, let's start in chronological order, beginning with the very first set to release Skull Servant card support, Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon. Released in March 8th, 2002, also known as the first booster pack ever to be released in the TCG. So the first card for this archetype is Skull Servant. It's a dark level 1 zombie monster with 300 attack and 200 defense. And it says, a skeletal ghost that isn't strong but can mean trouble in large numbers. As you can see, it's a normal monster with absolute horrible stats and only level 1 monster. This card of course back in the day was the center of all jokes to cards that were pure trash. Little did players know back in the day that Skull Servant would eventually become a fairly solid archetype. The second card in Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, although not technically a part of the Skull Servant / Wight archetype, is actually a related card to Skull Servant, simply because it's in the card text of this card, known as Flame Ghost. It's a dark level 3 zombie monster with 1000 attack and 800 defense, and it's a vanilla fusion monster that says Skull Servant and Dissolve Rock as its materials. Shit card back in the day, shittier card now. One of the worst cards ever, like many fusion monsters that came out in Legend of Blue Eyes. But again, I had to mention it just so people aren't like, what about Flame Ghost? Well, there you go. Yeah, don't run this ever. The next set that released Skull Servant support was The Lost Millennium, a set that came out in June 1st, 2005. So King of the Skull Servants is a dark level 1 zombie monster with question mark attack and 0 defense. And its effect reads, the original attack of this card is the combined number of King of the Skull Servants and Skull Servant in your graveyard times 1000. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can banish one other King of the Skull Servants or one Skull Servant from your graveyard, special summon this card. King of the Skull Servants is the heart and soul of the Skull Servant deck, because overall the concept is to get this guy all the way up to ridiculous numbers to OTK your opponent with one attack. Now I will say that the card has overall been indirectly buffed throughout the years, although the card has aged a decent amount simply because it must be destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard to utilize its second effect. It's still a pretty solid card. Run 3 of these and never any less. The next set with some support is Light of Destruction, which came out in May 13th, 2008. So now we're going to get into the Wight cards of this archetype, which is essentially why the name changed from Skull Servant to Wight. And the first one being the Lady in White. It's a dark level 3 zombie monster with 0 attack and 2200 defense. Its effect says, face up level 3 or lower zombie type monsters on the field, except the Lady in White, cannot be destroyed by battle and are unaffected by spells / traps. This card's name becomes Skull Servant while it is in the graveyard. So it does provide some formidable protection to the Skull Servant cards, but the problem is that it's not necessarily the purpose of the deck itself. While I appreciate the protection, the overall goal is to get cards into the graveyard to boost King of the Skull Servants. Really, the only overall benefit of this card is its last effect, where it becomes a Skull Servant while in the graveyard, which at the time of its release was an alternative way to get even more attack for King of the Skull Servants, but nowadays it's been heavily power crept by other Wight cards. The next set is Star Strike Blast, which came out in November 16th, 2010, and introduced one new addition. Wightmare is a dark level 1 zombie monster with 300 attack and 200 defense. Its effect says, while it is in the graveyard, this card's name is treated as Skull Servant. You can discard this card to activate one of the following effects. Select one of your removed from play Skull Servant or Whitemare and return it to the graveyard, or select one of your removed from play the Lady in White or King of the Skull Servants and special summon it. To be completely honest, this card is really great for the archetype. The fact that you can just simply use its effect while it's in your hand by discarding it to the graveyard, thus giving 1000 bonus attack to King of the Skull Servants, is already a plus. In addition, you get to choose one of two effects. The reason why the effect is specifically helping banish cards is because a few later cards that came out do actually utilize the whole banish feature, which is in a way problematic for the archetype because you want the cards in the graveyard. So this card is actually helping out your cards by actually saving them, going back to the graveyard or special summoning support cards as well as possibly King of the Skull Servants, while also sending itself to the graveyard, which is incredibly beneficial. Yeah, this card is really solid. The next set is Photon Shockwave, came out in November 15, 2011 and introduced one new addition. Tri-White is a normal spell card that says, target 3 level 2 or lower normal monsters in your graveyard, special summon them from the graveyard. While the card does specifically help Skull Servant and only Skull Servant, it's not exactly the most convenient card for the archetype. Really, the card doesn't really have good synergy with this series, and the biggest reason why is because this card is more so for Law of the Normal decks. Those decks' ultimate goal is to have 5 level 1 normal monsters on the field. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but cards like this actually help benefit that. The problem is that this card for this specific deck is not going to work because it only works on Skull Servant, possibly one of the least useful cards in the deck. The set following this is Duelist Alliance, came out on August 15, 2014 and introduced one new card. Wight Prince is a dark level 1 zombie monster with 0 attack and 0 defense, and its effect reads, if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can send one Skull Servant and one The Lady in White from your hand or deck to the graveyard. You can banish 2 Skull Servants and this card from your graveyard, special summon one King of the Skull Servants from your deck. This card's name becomes Skull Servant while it is in the graveyard. As you can see, there's a reason why Whitemare is useful, because if you actually do use its second effect, which actually has quite a large cost, then you can use Whitemare to bring at least one of those cards back. Keep in mind that you cannot use Whitemare to bring back Wight Prince while banished. The reason why is because Whitemare targets specifically Skull Servant or Whitemare or the Lady in White or King of the Skull Servants, and Whitemare's effect says that it becomes Skull Servant while in the graveyard, not while banished. However, the first effect is actually incredibly useful. While sometimes it may be difficult to get it to the graveyard upon draw, it'll at least be able to send one Skull Servant and one Lady in White from specifically your deck to the graveyard. Overall, fairly solid card, not amazing by any means, but it is very useful. The next set is OTS Tournament Pact 1, which came out in March 18th, 2016 and introduced one new addition to the series. This next card is just like Flame Ghost, not actually a support card, but it's a related card because Skull Servant can be found in the card text of this card. The card is Zombie Warrior. It's a dark level 3 zombie fusion monster with 1200 attack and 900 defense, and it says Skull Servant plus Battle Warrior. Once again, it's a vanilla monster, it's really bad. I'm actually amazed that it took this long for this card to come out with the TCG, because this card was already in the OCG for years and years back in the early days of the OCG. Overall, never run this card in the deck, never ever. And the last set is Raging Tempest, which came out in February 10th, 2017 and introduced the last support card for the archetype. Wight Princess is a light level 3 zombie monster with 1600 attack and 0 defense, and its effect says, this card's name becomes Skull Servant while it is in the graveyard. If this card is normal or special summon, you can send one Wight Prince from your deck to the graveyard. During either player's turn, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard. All monsters currently on the field lose attack and defense equal to their own level/rank times 300 until the end of this turn. This is a fantastic piece of support for the Wight archetype. A number of reasons why, but first of all, as you can see, it becomes Skull Serpent while in the graveyard. In addition to that, you get to Foolish Burial a Wight Prince from your deck to the graveyard upon any summon, normal or special. And lastly, it is incredibly easy to send this card to the graveyard for getting 1000 more attack for your King of the Skull Servants. The card is extremely well synergized with the rest of the archetype, and because of that, it's a very solid card. The fact that all monsters on the field lose attack and defense equal to 300 times their level/rank clearly means that it's going to benefit your Skull Servant/White cards a lot more, because almost all of them are level 1, but opponents' monsters are more than likely not going to be level 1. Ultimately, the card is really useful for this archetype. And that about covers the entire Skull Serpent / Wight archetype. As you can see, it's very interesting because it utilizes the graveyard to your advantage to buff up your King of the Skull Serpents to get some massive attack. The big problem, as you can see, is that there's simply not enough cards to actually fully support the archetype. There's a total of 9 cards for this archetype, 3 of which you will never use, being Flame Ghost, Zombie Warrior, and Tri-White, which basically limits your option to 6 cards. So let's talk about a few cards that can actually help. For starters, Armageddonite is a fantastic card for this deck, because on the summon, it lets you Foolish Burial one of your Skull Serpents / Wights to the graveyard. A few other strong zombie support cards would be Zombie Master, Goblin Zombie, and Mizuki, as all of these have effects that utilize from the graveyard or at least let you search cards from your deck. And lastly, cards like Allure of Darkness, Foolish Burial, and even to a lesser extent cards like Where Art Thou could also be potentially useful in this deck. Ultimately, if you're ever able to find cards that send cards directly to the graveyard, specifically from the deck or to a lesser extent from the hand, it'll probably be a really beneficial card, especially if the cost of those cards is not that much. Secondly, cards that can actually help benefit level 1 monsters would also be a plus, as most Skull Serpent cards are actually level 1 monsters. The deck is overall composed of a lot of really fun cards to use and combine, and it's really interesting and entertaining to just try to find the right balance of how many Wights versus Skull Serpents versus other support cards to utilize to make the most beneficial Skull Serpent deck. While not amazing or meta by any means, it is overall incredibly entertaining to utilize this archetype. So that is going to be it. Once again, as always, go ahead and leave a comment on anything that you recommend for me to change in terms of the style of the video or in terms of the archetype itself. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video, and I will see all of you in the next one. Bye bye everyone, have a great and a fantastic day.